Welcome back to the YOUniverse Podcast. I'm your host, Shanleigh, and today we're focusing on some challenges involving prioritizing yourself. Maybe that's physical wellness alongside just the variety of life that might be constantly vying for our attention. We want to make sure that we're putting ourselves first. In this episode, we'll explore some scenarios that we might commonly encounter. We're going to break down techniques to help us navigate them, but more importantly, we're going to offer an opportunity for accountability to one another so that we can welcome change. So let's get into it. Let's kick things off with a point in time in my own timeline. I was working as a flight attendant at JetBlue Airways alongside my boyfriend. We did that together. And here in this environment, we had very flexible schedules that we could make our own. We never took work home with us, and we also had ample time to work out, meal prep, and just juggle side hustles that might have interested us. During that time in my life, I flew, but I also was a personal trainer and a behavioral health coach for a company called Noom. Not only did this job allow me to incorporate, physical and mental health activities into a work day, but it also was completely virtual, which was perfect as an introvert. That said, during this phase in my life, I had an array of clients. Some were struggling with obesity, others eating disorders. Some might have been trying to gain and even lose weight. But the one thing that each of these clients had in common was their work lifestyle. There was a 9 to 5, being a full-time parent, or more often than not, a combination of the two. So the common barrier that came up the most was struggling to find ways to incorporate movement during the day with effective meal prepping, which at this point in my life was something that I happened to be mastering. So every time there would be a client setback or an excuse for not actually sticking to the goal that we set, I found myself getting a little frustrated because I couldn't relate. Therefore, I felt like I cared more about their goals than they actually cared about their own. So obviously, I want to put this out there. I never stated this to my clients, but internalizing that mindset really wore me down over time. Fast forward to the future, and the universe said, bitch, you need to step into your client's shoes and just be a better woman and an overall coach. So here we are in the present day in their shoes. I now work for a nonprofit sector on a standard 8-hour workday in a very sedentary role. So remember all of those barriers that my past clients had experienced? Well, you better believe that I'm standing in their shoes now. Now, something about me is that I really used to love cooking and meal prepping, and now there's just so much constantly vying for my attention that my mindset has shifted to, there are other things that I could be using this time for that need to get done. And I never used to be like that, but the list is never ending, and there's only so many hours in the day. At least that's what it feels like more often than not. Alongside that, I used to love exercising, sometimes for hours on end. And now that I found myself going days, weeks, sometimes even months without getting in a solid targeted exercise, which when you go from somebody that's working out every day to maybe walking once in a while, it's an extreme change. So what has that done? My anxiety and stress, it is absolutely through the roof. My cortisol's at an all-time peak, making it very difficult to get a weight that I usually used to sustain very easily. And to that point, I do want to just emphasize that the scale is not the only way to measure progress, so please take that with a grain of salt. But in this case, the higher my cortisol, the easier it is to hinder multiple channels of measuring progress, whether it be the scale, measurements of your physical body, muscle mass, body composition, you name it. Basically, all the ways that you can see progress are not working for me right now. So all of that's to say, here I am, a wellness specialist. I have all of the tools, the knowledge that you can think of to sustain during, these strenuous times. And yet it takes all I have to get up in the morning, to get out of bed, to complete even a 30-minute walk on a good day. And, I know what works for me. Journaling's a go-to, meditation, maybe even a 30 to 45-minute workout at minimum, plus a form of active recovery filtered in there. Above all, I know that waking up and going to bed at the same time or consistent times so that I can have about 7 hours of rest is perfect. but yet I can't seem to muster up the courage to make that happen in my day-to-day. So what was once an organic love now feels like a task, and that alone is just very mentally defeating. The lesson that I'm learning here and still navigating is discipline through emotional waves. I have come to terms and realized that I let my emotions rule me, and as a result of that, that hinders my progress in multiple life channels. And you've probably heard this, but that saying, do it tired. For me, it's more like do it through the storm and all of the size of the waves that it brings to shore. If you can do things on the days that you don't want to, no matter the percent battery that you might be charged to, you will be unstoppable in the game of you versus you. Now, here I am telling you all of this so you can rest assured that, I go through it too. I'm sitting here preaching to you that you need to do this and that, but I want you to know that we're all human here. I'm going through it just as much as you are. So let's talk about these things and keep each other accountable. Now, to all of the women that might be tuning in, listening to me, I know our raging hormones add just a little extra layer of trial here. So that maybe men don't experience as much as us, at least at the magnitude that we do, but this is not an excuse. You want to be treated equally in this world, then we really have to challenge our minds to navigate through it all, no matter the barriers. We can all be warriors, built for tough, as long as we can do the work in exercising that mental muscle. I'm a big advocate that mental muscle has to match the physical element. Okay, so we've talked about a lot here. But in sum, we all can agree that juggling life and prioritizing ourselves is very difficult. We now know that we all have more in common than maybe we might have stopped to realize or recognize. So what else? What else can we all relate to when struggling to just embrace the suck of the storm? A girlfriend of mine and I were talking about how our worsened conditions have kind of taken over the spirits of the moment. What I mean by that is, special occasions, holidays, confidence, ability to remain truly present and in the moment. Probably a big one here, but the desire to take photos and have that moment forever. You're not trying to remember that moment because you're so uncomfortable. It's truly hard to look forward to things when we feel like, one, we are failing, but two, we're not an optimal person. We're not an optimal friend, significant other, maybe even a parent, if that applies to you. So what does this start to eventually do? We create a reel of just this negative self-talk that lives on repeat in our minds. What does that begin to do? Well, it begins to condition our reticular activating system, our RNS, to look for things that validate that belief or make them true. Combination of both. It becomes just this never-ending story, and the worst part, we're the ones driving the continuation. What? That's freaking mad. Okay, so here's this problem. How do we fix it? Let's try to flip it. Flip the story that we are telling ourselves when we're struggling to navigate this stimulating, fast-paced life. Let's rewire the narrative. I like rewire. That's my favorite phrase. Now, there are several ways people can choose to do this, but for me, I really like to incorporate this process in my journaling. Journaling can be whatever you need it to be, but for me, I like to keep it short and to the point. I keep track of 3, maybe 5 negative things that are just reoccurring in my mind throughout the day. And how do I really determine that, you might be wondering? Usually, if it's something that I have said to myself at least 3 times in a single day, I know that it's a circulating belief. So I take a mental note of what that is so that when I sit down in the evening, I can just jot them all down. And for me, I keep it to a singular word that when I read it, only I truly know what it means alongside the narrative that I have in my mind. That I know Joe Schmo comes up, reads my journal, and knows my life. I like to keep it coded, So then to the right of those negative words, I write a different word with a more positive meaning. Again, something that if I read it, only I could really interpret the correlation between the 2 words. Once I've written a positive word next to each negative one, I reframe that narrative by saying it to myself several times. And the frequency of that really just depends on how rooted the belief is, which also determines whether or not I actually have to physically say it out loud to myself. And if it's deeply rooted, it usually finds its way into my journal multiple days throughout the week. Okay, so we've journaled. What do we do from there? I like to reference what I call a fulfillment list. For me, a fulfillment list includes things that I want done daily that truly just fill up my cup. So what categories for me fill up my cup? Obviously, physical health, mental health, my partner, my dogs, which are really cute. My dad, Kanga and Rue. Education, tidiness. And then I would even say some kind of creative avenue. And although that this changes monthly, it usually includes things like making or resetting the bed, taking my vitamins, monitoring my water intake, hitting a certain goal there, walking the dogs so that they're taken care of, referencing maybe even a joined calendar with my significant other that we fill out each month, reading just to freshen up language, learning something new, or podcast scripting. Getting up and going to bed on time as well is probably the last thing I'd add to that list. Things that measure a successful day for me, completely unrelated to work and outside commitments, make it onto this fulfillment list. And then, I kind of grade myself at the end of the day. I like to aim for about 70% or higher on that list to deem it as a successful day. Now, mind you, there are some days that don't make it to 70%. So on those days, I more or less use that journaling opportunity to just dive deeper into the why and find a way to potentially overcome it the following day. A good example of overcoming that why may be looking for something specific throughout the day that could just lift me up, give me that reminder to just kind of keep pushing through and kind of like a mental high five, like, hey, you're doing great. I mentioned that specifically because Mel Robbins, I think I mentioned her before, but she's a motivational speaker, podcaster, and an author. She looks for a heart on those days. On those hard days, she challenges her brain to look for them anywhere that she could possibly find them all around her. It could be a coffee shop, it could be driving, it could be walking on the street. So it's kind of like when you see a car that you really like and all of a sudden you start seeing them everywhere. That is the same exact concept for training your reticular activating system. So if you start looking for the good, then you're open to the good and you're more willing to let the good in and more susceptible to believing in the good. It's just kind of a mental game that you can send a signal to yourself as a sign that you might have needed that day. Okay, so now we know life is hard to juggle. We've talked about some good techniques that can reel us back in. Now what? We do our personal best to show up, dude. I know that seems simple, but it really is that simple. Showing up also doesn't mean being at 100% performance every single day. We start aiming for that, then we've lost before we've even begun. So, if you find yourself in this, what I like to call battle cycle, which is a mental game in your mind, I want to encourage you to seek change. Now, change looks different to everyone, but it obviously depends on the circumstances. But hypothetically, if your job is weighing you down, go get a new one. Maybe even see about starting your own business if that interests you. You hate the city? Well, I don't know, consider moving. There is this facade embedded in the traditional system that has us believing we can't shift gears when we want to. And that's total bullshit, straight up. Starting over does often mean being humble enough to potentially take some steps back, or in other cases, bold enough to propel forward. Either way, the definition of insanity is repeating what you know doesn't work and expecting a different outcome. So don't do that. Mind you, I recognize that change alone can be very overwhelming and people process that overwhelm differently, sure. But it is the fresh start that paves the way for new lessons, fresh opportunities that can expand our mental, physical, and emotional toughness. And I truly speak for myself here when I say that, because I embody the notion that the key to happiness is to never give up on the pursuit of learning. And you can learn in more than one way. You don't have to just reference a textbook to learn. There are lessons everywhere in every nook and cranny of life. So the moment that we stop seeking discomfort through those multiple channels is the moment that we give up on the simple art of living. So go live, dude. Go live. One thing I know that is true is that I have practiced everything that I've preached to you today. There have been setbacks that felt like failures in the moment, and I didn't see the light. But I've said this before, and I truly embody this to my core. See what I did there? You only lose when you give up. One foot in front of the other, day by day. And the journey may be slow and impossible and painful, but it's still forward momentum. And slow movement is better than nothing at all. Now, I feel compelled to warn you, though. People will have opinions and, of course, paint their own perceptions of you along that journey. But at the end of the day, you will begin to just embody this bird's eye view. And once you do that, you will never accept a life on the ground again. And personally, that's worth it. I think it's worth it anyway. All right. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I do want to wrap up this episode with some goals of mine that kind of duel as a promise to myself. And you, my friends, are my accountability here. So feel free to share some of yours with me so that I can return the favor. So I want to start with some of the basics that I feel I've kind of gotten away from that are important to me on a daily basis. First, sticking to the meals that I've prepped and tracking my caloric intake. That doesn't work for everybody, but it works for me. If you fixate on numbers, I don't encourage the tracking of calories. Just like I wouldn't encourage maybe measuring yourself on the scale as well. Number 2, exercising consistently at a minimum of 30 minutes, maybe 5 days a week with those 2 active recovery days. I'm lucky if I get anything in, so that would be a huge improvement for me. Then I would say sticking to the schedule that I've created, not only for myself, but for the things I want to do with my partner. I also really like delegating quality time to my partner and making that a non-negotiable. For example, we really like the sunrises on the beach with our dogs on Sunday mornings, but we do often cancel this due to just like the never-ending list of things that we need to complete or the sleep that we're trying to catch up on. I really want that to be a non-negotiable. It's so important to prioritize the people that keep you grounded. And then I'd say lastly, I want to travel more. It ignites my soul, keeps me fresh. So yeah, what do these basics help fuel? So again, number 1, I want to look and feel good from the inside out, which makes it easier to just be fully present in any social environment. I feel it'll boost my confidence just by delivering on my word alone to myself, but also the ones that I love. And a ripple effect helps me kind of just manage my time more efficiently with individual projects. Prioritizing people in my life that keep me grounded so that they know they're still in the forefront of my mind. And then, of course, lastly, travel, cultural immersion, and just experience beyond my daily reality to keep me humble. I think that is so important. I would encourage it for everybody. So, how do all of these kind of just prepare me for lingering goals that I might have yearly or monthly or weekly? Well, it positions me to take on a marathon. And a marathon is something that seems just so far out of reach because I have asthma and I am lacking consistent training. So if I get more consistent, I can build that stamina in my lungs and then I can achieve that goal. And of course, time management helps me to pre-record podcast episodes so that I'm not frantically scrambling on the weekends or closer to holidays. I'm prepared instead of for success. And then, of course, the combination of everything so far just allows me to be in that optimal state of mind to lean into maybe even promotional opportunities at work, or finding new employment that allows me to be remote or gain travel perks so that I can take my work anywhere and move anywhere that I potentially desire. That's important to me. And I do feel kind of tied down being in a hybrid role right now that doesn't allow for fully remote positions. And lastly, this welcomes physical, mental, and financial fortune. And who doesn't want that? If you don't want that, I'm curious why. Let me know in the comments. Okay, so with that, everybody, I just want to thank you for tuning in and your patience for not posting last week. Again, I'd love to hear more about you. What are your barriers? What techniques kind of reel you back in when you're off course? Or better yet, do we share some of the same grounding techniques that offer the same effect for forward momentum? Let's just keep the conversation going in the comment sections on any platform. Now, all of my platforms are linked on my website, so just visit www.youniversepodcast.com. And remember, universe is YOU, because this is all about you. And don't forget to tune in to the YOUniverse Podcast every Wednesday for the latest episode. So again, stay true, stay brave, and always keep moving forward. I'll see you next time.